Well, good morning to all of you. I'm glad you're here. Good morning. It's lovely to see all of you. I want to make sure you know everyone who is making this service even more beautiful than I could reasonably expect. You already know our guest speaker, Casy Childs, a son of this church, but also a man of the theater, of the arts, who is back here not only to deliver his wisdom, but to enjoy the company of your presence. To my right, current member and musician extraordinaire, Robin Connell, whose piano stylings are always welcome in this space. And someone even more remote, yes, and someone even more remote in miles, if not years, Francesca your whole name, Satyar, is that right? Amari Satyar.
Amari Saitar.
Saitar. I had the pleasure of performing their wedding ceremony some years ago in this very suit. And it took. They're apparently still married, which is great. We love that. Francesca lives on the West Coast, but her heart belongs to Grand Rapids, and she's back. So we have a collection of community members to make this. I'm Fred Wooden. I work for a living here. So let me stand to the background and let all these wonderful amateurs, which means lovers, give the best they can to Fountain Street Church. Some words to help us begin the day. I have to find I had the right words and they escaped from me, but here are a few. We are here to abet creation, to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face, complex nature, because creation should not play to an empty house. With that vague theatrical reference from Annie Dillard, I invite you as we rise and sing our first hymn to look around, see a beautiful face. It could even be your own. Contrary to your order of worship, I'd like us to share the responsive invocation now, and then I'll give a few words of welcome. These words by the poet Nicky Giovanni. Whatever human beings are, we are storytellers. It is our stories that give life to the future. In order to have a happy ending, in order to be triumphant, in order to be heroic, you have to tell your own story. The women's movement knows that. Black people know that. Brown people know that. Yellow people know that. You have to be able to tell your own story in order to show that you are worthy, that you belong. To a certain extent, we are always here to tell our story. Words of welcome are always a story about Fountain Street Church, a community that has been defiantly different, daringly liberal, and also somewhat dastardly for 150 years. All of us here are here for at least a moment. Some of us will be here just for today. Others will be here a lifetime. Most of us measure our period of involvement in years, but what we really count are heartbeats, because each of us brings something of our life to this place, and it is our lives that give life to this place. The honor of bringing Casey back here, who was a child, a boy, that he has a picture of himself very young in his possession right now, is a reminder that no matter where we are in our lifetimes, you belong here at the moment that you are here. And you have a story to tell that enriches the life of this church. Fountain Street Church is, in fact, 150 years old this year as an organized body. And we are honoring that all year long. Part of the reason so many people are visiting us this summer is they bring the stories of their times and their hopes. We hope that you, if you are visiting with us today, will stick around. We're not all that different from any other community. We have three things we try to do, and we try to get better at them each week. We try to free our minds so that we can follow the truth wherever it leads. We try to grow our souls, by which we mean we wish to be better and better at the people we could be, not just the people we are. And we wish to change the world because we know it could be better than it is. And if it doesn't become that way, it's because we didn't try hard enough. If that's part of your world, no matter what your spiritual story might be, you belong here for today or for the rest of your life. So thank you so much for being here. And I thank Francesca, who will bless us with a prayer that I could not even begin to utter.
Sometimes you're happy and sometimes you're sad, but the world goes round. Sometimes you lose every nickel you had, but the world goes around. Sometimes your dreams, they get broken in pieces, but that doesn't matter at all. Take it from me, there's still gonna be a summer, a winter, a spring, and a fall. And sometimes a friend starts treating you bad, but the world goes around. And sometimes your heart breaks with a deafening sound. Somebody loses, then somebody wins, then one day it's kicks, then it's kicks in the shins, but the planet spins and the world goes around and around. The world goes around. The world goes around. Sometimes your dreams, they get broken in pieces, but that doesn't alter a thing. Take it from me, there's still gonna be a summer, a winter, a fall, and a spring. And sometimes a friend starts treating you bad, but the world goes around. And sometimes your heart breaks with a deafening sound. Somebody loses, then somebody wins, then one day it's kicks, then it's kicks in the shins, but the planet spins and the world goes around and around and around, around and around. The planet spins and the world goes around again. Thank you.
Amen, sister. Prayer is a curious word. If you go to most churches, everybody assumes that you bow your head and you hear the usual language, and there's nothing wrong with that. As they used to say on the television program, not that there's anything wrong with that. But at Fountain Street Church, we go a little beyond the form, a little beyond the words, because isn't that the point? Prayer has its origin in a word that means please, as in, would you do me a favor, please? So I'd like to ask what favor you'd be asking if you could ask a favor. What would you have that you seem to lack? Whether you reach out for something, someone that occupies and controls the universe, or seriously doubt that such a thing could even exist, we all stand in need. For some, we'd like to be able to do something we used to do when we were young, or to be free of a pain of body or of soul. For some, we are tired of carrying a burden of grief or of worry. For some, it is just looking for enough money to get to the end of the week, or maybe just the end of the day. We all stand in need. Needs that we dare not tell one another because, well, it would make us feel weak, make us feel ashamed, make us feel disappointed in ourselves. And yet these things we need, simple and ordinary though they may be, are the things that make us a family of living beings. Please, 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 if it be some will of someone somewhere to bestow upon me that bit of help. And if not that help, then maybe some comfort in the struggle. For after all, we cannot get everything we need, but we can get perhaps some company along the way. A knowing smile from across the room, a wink from an old friend, a touch on the shoulder or an arm around us. And sometimes that, well, that's enough for now. Please, please, if you can't give me what I need, give me something. Give me a moment to hope that I can be here again tomorrow, that I can be who I am and do what I can. And if that's enough, so be it. And so we pause in prayerful silence as we care for the thing we need and open our hearts to the needs around us so we may enter the week ready to say please and thank you. Invitation to offering. Sounds like we're going to a party, doesn't it? Please, let's go to the offering. And in a sense, that's true. A party, again, is a word that means we're all part of something. Take your time, take your time. This is the most sacred moment in the service. Forgive me. Not because it's about money, but because it's about value. Like it or not, in this country, we establish value by getting out our pocketbooks. And when we do what we do here at Fountain Street Church is we share our bounty, not only with ourselves, but with others. And that is part of the way we make a down payment on our commitment to be involved in this world. You see, some people think church is a sanctuary. I'm going to get out of the world, and that's a good thing. We want a little time off, but you're never completely outside the world. Remember, these beautiful bricks were made by workers somewhere who sweat the day away. And while they've been here for over half a century, their labor is still in the clay. Let's remember that these chairs were arranged by people who work at this church, and they put up a little bit of work too, and they don't get paid as much as most of us do. But we love them because they are committed to us. And the work, loving as it is, that these wonderful musicians give, we're surrounded by the effort of others. And so when we give, we are valuing that effort and the effort of those who are just alive. So reach down inside, and if you have folding money, that's all the better. It makes less noise. That's what Amy Semple McPherson said years ago when she was running her church, the Foursquare Gospel in Los Angeles. She would pray, "Oh Lord, let us not darken and dampen the sounds of these church with the crude sound of nickels and dimes, but let the soft zephyrs of tens and twenties be felt in our..." So if you have George hanging out in your pocket, that's fine. If you have 2 or 3 Georges, that's good too. I think Abe Lincoln is a great guy. Spread him around, and we all know that Andrew Jackson has seen way too much action. So we would love for you to put all these fine gentlemen to work in ways that perhaps they never anticipated. That offering of real value to you, that which matters, that which will do the work that we must do, that offering will all be most gratefully received. three brief passages to awaken your mind and prepare you to listen with greater clarity and conviction to Casey's remarks. First, from Flannery O'Connor. There is something in us as storytellers and listeners to stories that demands the redemptive act, that demands that what falls at least can be offered the chance to be restored. The reader of today looks for this motion, and rightly so. But what he has forgotten is the cost of it. His sense of evil is diluted or lacking altogether, and so he has forgotten the price of restoration. When he reads a novel, he wants either his sense tormented or his spirits raised. He wants to be transported instantly, either to mock damnation or mock innocence. Arthur Clarke, in the book from which we derive the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, wrote, "Now, before you make a movie, you have to have a script. And before you have a script, you have to have a story. Though some avant-garde movie directors have tried to dispense with the latter, and you'll find that their work is only in art theaters." And finally, the most ancient, and in some ways the most powerful, Homer from the Odyssey. "It is wine that leads me on." The wild wine that sets the wisest man to sing at the top of his lungs, laugh like a fool. It drives the man to dancing. It even tempts him to blurt out stories better never told. With that in mind, intoxicate us, Miss Francesca.
How do you say to a child in the night, nothing's all black, but then nothing's all white? How do you say it will all be all right when you know that it mightn't be true? What do you do? Careful the things you say, children will listen. Careful the things you do, children will see and learn. Children may not obey, but children will listen. Children will look to you for which way to turn, to learn what to be. Careful before you say, listen to me. Children will listen. Careful the wish you make. Wishes are children. Careful the path they take, wishes come true, not free. Careful the spell you cast, not just on children. Sometimes the spell will last past what you can see and turn against you. Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell. Children will listen. Guide them, then step away. Children will glisten. Tamper with what is true, and children will turn. If just to be free. Careful before you say, listen to me. Children will listen. Children will listen. Children will listen.
I saw a man about to jump off a bridge. I said, don't do it. He said, nobody loves me. I said, God loves you. He said, yes. I said, are you a Christian or a Jew? He said, Christian. I said, me too. Protestant or Catholic? He said, Protestant. I said, me too. What franchise? He said, Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? He said, Northern Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Liberal Baptist or Northern Conservative Baptist? He said, Northern Liberal Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Liberal Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Liberal Baptist Eastern region? He said, Northern Liberal Baptist Great Lakes region. I said, me too. Northern Liberal Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Liberal Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912? He said, Northern Liberal Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. I said, die, you heretic. And I pushed him off the bridge. There, I have just told you a story. I have told you a story in the form of a joke. I have told you a story to express a truth that I believe is important, yet all the details in the story are lies. There was no bridge, there was no man trying to jump, there was no last-minute discussion of religious persuasions. More importantly, I am not a follower of the Northern Liberal Baptist Region Great Lakes Region Council of 1879. I am a Fountain Street Baptist, Council of who knows when. I stood in this very chapel in 1959 and was baptized or christened or whatever we were calling it then by Dr. Littlefair. And most importantly, I remember being hugely disappointed that I was not being offered the full benefits of a total immersion baptism in the very cool baptismal that is secluded behind the sanctuary, which then was being used to store paint. The story had elements of conflict, elements of surprise, elements of confusion, spiritual crisis, and a life and death situation, and yet it was all made up, stolen, right off the internet. And what's more, I never told you the story expecting you to believe it. I obviously told you the story because I wanted to express a truth about hypocrisy that can sometimes creep into institutional religions. And I've learned through my religious indoctrination and through a lifetime of storytelling in many forms that often the best way to greater truths is through abstraction or indirection. I had a theater directing teacher at Carnegie Mellon University who began the first day of class by stating, all art is a lie about the truth. And in short, I just told you this string of lies because I wanted to express a simple truth. It's the truth that humans have been telling each other since the beginning of storytelling, when our forebears sat around campfires and told the stories of the day's hunt, and probably before that. But you've never heard it in this way, in this place, by me, in my stolen voice, with my own special spin, in this new, shiny, updated version. When I come back to Grand Rapids, a city that was very kind to me in childhood and that I loved growing up in, I am flooded with memories. Around every corner is a memory, and I express these memories in the form of stories. I walk into this building, and the storyteller in me goes into overdrive. From the Vesper services we produced here in this chapel, to Ella Fitzgerald telling me not to worry about having braces on my teeth, that my teeth would be straight and pretty someday, just like her son's. To rehearsing with the junior choir, the Bell Choir, and performing in the world premiere of Magic in the Heart of the Universe, which was still being written right up until 11 a.m. the summer morning we performed it. To meeting Stan Kenton, Duke Ellington, Dave Brubeck, B.B. King, Frank Zappa, and the Mothers of Invention. To listening to Bishop Pike talk about faith, and a year later, after he died on the desert, to hearing his wife talk about his death. To hearing Eleanor Hamilton in 1969, who had written a book with the radical title Sex Before Marriage. To listening to Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden speak out against the war in Vietnam, much to the dismay of many of the local citizens, many of whom had already anointed her Hanoi Jane. To the nursery upstairs before the building was remodeled. To the movie we shot in this church with the pie fight in the kitchen and the climactic chase scene up the bell tower steps, ending with the villains being pushed off the ledge of the bell tower, with the people at Bell Telephone across the street calling the church office and saying someone is hanging from your bell tower. I recall when I was well into into adulthood, recounting from my mother these memories of growing up in Grand Rapids, to which she replied with some bemusement, "Well, you certainly had a secular upbringing." And though through the years many of these stories have been refined, revised, filtered, refiltered, and been subject to many edits and developmental workshops of my imagination, they are still fundamentally true in nature, and I tell them out of a need to express truths. They are my voice. They are my story, such as it is. We're all hardwired to tell stories and to listen to stories. Expressing simple human truths is a basic part of our makeup. And unlike other basic human needs we are hardwired for, eating, sleeping, spiritual quests, we seldom take the time to stop and examine how we tell stories, how we listen to stories, how we fact-check stories when fact-checking is appropriate, how we retell stories. How often do we savor the storyteller in ourselves? Do we take the time to step back and appreciate the architecture of the story as well as the story's meaning? I began learning what I know from storytelling at a very early age from parents who read to me, from the hymns we sing in church. I believe the Fountain Street Sanctuary was where the powers of theater and church first connected for me. Listening to Dr. Littlefair, who was an excellent speaker, express his ideas as he stood in a dark room in what appeared to be a single light. As a child, it was so theatrical. Later in life, my suspicions were confirmed when I had a lighting design teacher who said there's nothing more theatrical than a single actor standing in a single light on an empty stage. And every light that you add after that subtracts from that theatricality. And by theatricality, I do not mean cheap theatrics. I mean the power of both the theater and the church to glamorize thought, to glamorize ideas, to glamorize our quest for meaning. I learned more about the marriage of theatricality and storytelling from seeing my mother in Paul Dreyer's production of John Brown's Body at the Civic Theater on Monroe Street, also starring the Fountain Street Choir. I learned from the storytelling sessions we would have at Ryerson Children's Room across the street before they built the extension. To this day, I find nothing more impressive than a group of young children attentively sitting at a teacher's feet as they slowly pass the picture in front of them and the kids are shouting, "Let me see, let me see, let me see." To these young listeners, the suspension of disbelief comes quite naturally. Careful the tales you tell. Children will listen. In theater, we place great value in the suspension of disbelief, which is the listener's ability and willingness to suspend disbelief in order to enjoy or immerse themselves in the powers of the story. Too often nowadays, I'm being asked to suspend disbelief almost on a daily basis. I'm exhausted with suspending disbelief. I was fortunate in my life to know at a very early age what I wanted to do with my life. After college, I moved to New York City and I began finding new ways of telling stories. I was fortunate to hook up with some extraordinary storytellers, some known, some very unknown. Some were writing for mass audiences. Others were writing for an audience of one themselves. I quickly discovered that the storytellers I loved and the stories I wanted to direct and produce were not necessarily going to provide me with many worldly riches or even subway fare. It became clear to me that there was never going to be a question of how much money I was going to make telling these stories of these new plays by new playwrights. It was always a question of how much money I was willing to lose. And I am proud to say I have lost fortunes. After about 6 years of figuring that out, I decided it might be a good idea to supplement this venture with something more commercial. And that venture could also become part of my story. I landed in the field of telling stories on television, mostly daytime drama, soap opera, as we elegantly term it. And here I found a very different audience. In the theater, the audience tends to be well-educated, well-heeled, mostly of the upper classes. In the world of daytime television, we have our share of well-educated and well-heeled. Our demographics with college students was very good. Our demographics in the prisons was very good. But our core audiences tended to be southern, northern, Great Lakes, western, eastern, conservative region. And after a few years of not giving much thought to the makeup of the audience, it finally struck me one day that we were sitting on a very powerful tool. And I became fascinated with this audience. Here we were being invited into millions of homes for 1 hour episodes, 38 minutes with commercials, 5 days a week. And inside that very predictable format of dramatic television, you could do a lot to change hearts and minds. It was a realization those brighter than I had arrived at years before. So for the 30 years or so I directed and produced television, I like to think we did a lot in our storytelling to move people toward in their thinking. We told stories of women's rights, of interracial relationships, veterans' concerns, intergenerational stories, and many, many others. And we were telling these progressive stories long before they were ever allowed on nighttime television. I think we did one of the first same-sex kisses ever allowed on network, followed months later by the first wedding between two women that ever aired on network. The day the wedding aired, almost all of our advertisers left us, but they came back the next day. And there was that share of the audience that expressed their anger at being forcibly pulled out of the 10th century and into something more modern. But ultimately, they invested in these new ideas because they loved the characters. And they turned on the television every single day and sat through all of those commercials in the hopes that these characters would find happiness. Meanwhile, the storytelling in off-Broadway theater is changing in multiple ways. After years of lip service to diversity, I believe the dam has finally broken. We now have more opportunities for stories told by women, by people of color, people with disabilities, and the LGBT communities. We're not there yet, but as a society, we've recently made some big jumps. I'm confident it has nothing to do with our national politics. At Primary Stages, my off-Broadway theater, we just closed Kate Hamill's adaptation of Little Women, produced at the Cherry Lane Theater in Greenwich Village. Little Women, as you know, is a beloved American classic by Louisa May Alcott about four sisters and their mother during the Civil War. It has been adapted into films, plays, operas, probably finger puppet shows. In Kate Hamill's version, although still set during the Civil War, two of the characters were played by Latina actresses and one by an actress who identified as Mexican American. Jo here was transsexual and was played by an African American actress. One critic wrote that if you like your Little Women straight, stay away from this production. Go to the library. The Wall Street Journal, a highly conservative newspaper, raved about the show, raved in the positive sense of the word, and another critic who swore little children was an essential part of his DNA said this was the best adaptation he had ever witnessed and that he could just imagine Louisa May Alcott thumping her forehead and saying, "Now, why didn't I think of that?" And there were certainly many who were not so enthusiastic. To them, I say, go to the library. There's nothing I can do to take the original story away from you, and your reaction is just as legitimate as mine. We did many free student matinees for New York City public high school students, and those kids got it. They got it. I used to think we should do more colorblind casting with these classics because it was important to reflect the faces we see every day on the street. I now have revamped my thinking. I think it's important to do colorblind casting because it opens the ideas of these old stories in so many interesting ways. And it often helps to improve access to these old war horses to modern audiences. Disney recently announced they are remaking the animated classic of The Little Mermaid with a black animated Ariel, and you would think the world is coming to an end. For the last 5 years, I've been involved with another approach to storytelling. We're currently documenting the on-camera interviews and the lives of the people who created America's off-Broadway theater movement. We're 160 interviews into the project. Our very first interview was Elizabeth Wilson, who some of you here probably knew. Liz Wilson, who I met in this church. If you didn't know her, you'd know her as Dustin Hoffman's mother in The Graduate, as well as many other fine films and plays. Cultures are defined by the stories they leave behind. An oral history project is an easy and very cheap project for a community to engage in. All one needs is someone with a cheap camera and a passion for listening to stories. With me, they have both. And if you think your story is not worthy, I would call your attention to the quote that's at the top of your programs from Martha Graham. She was writing a letter to Agnes DeMille. And Agnes DeMille was struggling with being an artist. And she wrote, "There is a vitality, a life force, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there's only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable it is, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours, clear and directly, to keep the channel open. You do not even have to believe in you, yourself, or your work. You have to keep open and aware directly to the urge that motivates you. Keep the channel open. No artist is pleased. There is no satisfaction whatever at any time. There is only a queer divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that makes us marching and makes us more alive than others. There's a great joy in giving and receiving stories. But recently, with the advancement of computers and the internet, we have now seen how storytelling can become weaponized. We now have the ability to provide by technology. All this ability, now how are we going to keep it from destroying us? Who are going to be the guardians of the ethical application of technology? Who's going to make sure suspending disbelief does not become a way of life? What will happen if we lose our ability to distinguish simple truths from made-up stories? And this is where Frankenstein enters the narrative. You didn't expect him to show up, did you? I mean, never underestimate the element of surprise. In 1818, a woman named Mary Shelley wrote a book called Frankenstein about a young scientist who created a sapient creature, a monster, a machine. Up until this time, stories had been about pretty much the same thing: human versus themselves, human versus human, human versus society, human versus the church, human versus God or the gods. But Mary Shelley introduced this idea of a new genre where humans versus the machine. And with it, she introduced the major theme that there is always the possibility that you can be destroyed by the monster you create. And here we return to my original string of lies. My lies, my abstractions, my expression of the truth. I began with a joke, a story, which was a lot of lies strung together into a story. But what if I were to create other stories, not jokes, out of whole cloth and find an audience on various internet sites? And what if I was to convey and convince you that these falsehoods indeed were true and required your immediate action? We live in a modern world where the components of storytelling are quickly changing and governance is often executed by those who control the narrative, regardless of how fictional that narrative might be. What if I was to dazzle you with my charisma and tell you the same story over and over and over again until it started taking on the sheen of truth? And what if I insisted that these were not lies, that these were deep truths? Imagine the power I could yield. And what if I were to employ things like deep fake? Now, at my fingertips, I have an app that I can create, have you online telling stories you never told, saying stories, things you never said. What if I had the nefarious intent or just the greedy intent in doing so? I also wonder about the fractionization of the audience and how this is affecting us with all of this social media. We grew up in a world where we often heard the same story as our friends. We had the same common sense for reflection and discussion. But now we walk into a room and there are 6 different people watching 6 different stories on 6 different devices. And where is the moment afterwards, which is the important moment, which everybody talks about this? In telling stories, I learned very early on that it was very important, particularly with comic stories, to protect the possibility of a happy ending. Turns out this is an important life lesson as well. There is a rule of comedy that no matter where I go with my story, I need to always protect the possibility of things ending happily. And to that end, I leave you with this. I often receive calls from panicked parents who say, my kid is going off to college, they want to go into the theater, what do I do? And after I talk them off the bridge, I remind them that we who are in the business of live performance, we are in the business of live storytelling, are in a growth industry. The more our lives become about staring at a computer screen 16 hours a day and dreaming about them at night, the bigger the backlash is going to be. We are the backlash. The more we will seek opportunities for live human contact in our spiritual, personal, and emotional lives. The more our lives become mired in misinformation, computers, and advanced technology, the more we will cherish the simple act of sitting down with other human beings and sharing our story.
what he said. So let that settle in for a moment. I recommend a book, if you don't already know it, on the origin of stories, a social evolutionary analysis as to why we humans do it. It's a scientific book. It's monstrously boring, but has great footnotes. Stories call, and lo, new justice. Stories speak, and lo, new truth. For each of us, from our lives and moments, have ways of bringing a fresher justice and a fresher truth to the world, whether we know it or not. May we be bold in doing so as we leave this place and bless the world with our stories, ready to be present and to listen in ways that have not even been heard, knowing that this day and every day is a day which the Lord has made. Therefore, let us rejoice and be ever glad. Amen and amen.